Hello, I'm David French in Washington. Our coverage of war in the Gulf continues. Allied warplanes continue to hammer Iraqi positions. The U.S. military command in Riyadh announced today that Allied aircraft have flown 41,000 missions since the war began, 2,500 in the past 24 hours alone. But officials also disclosed that 7 U.S. Marines were killed by an Allied missile attack.
And while the formal investigation has not been absolutely completed, we have enough evidence right now in the initial stages of the investigation to say with some great certainty that one of the LAVs, which is the light armored vehicle the Marines have, was in fact killed by friendly fire.
And 2 Marine pilots died when their Cobra helicopter went down during an escort mission. A U.S. Air Force B-52 bomber crashed into the Indian Ocean today on its way home from a bombing run over Kuwait. 3 of the 6 crewmen were rescued. The others are still missing. The bomber was returning to its base on Diego Garcia. That's a tiny island, a sand island in the Indian Ocean, 2,000 miles south of the Persian Gulf. Mechanical problems are suspected in the crash of the $50 million plane, the largest the Allied forces have. Allied forces on Scud-busting missions attacked 2 of the 3 sites Iraq used minutes before to launch missiles against Israel and Saudi Arabia. The Scud fired at Riyadh was intercepted by a U.S. Patriot missile, but the debris destroyed 2 apartment buildings and injured 29 people. There were no reports of damage or injuries in the 2 attacks on Israel. Hundreds of Bradley fighting vehicles are under inspection by the U.S. Army. There are reports of the A-2 model of the tank-like carrier has a transmission defect. It's designed to carry 9 infantrymen into heavy combat. The problem could cut its top speed from 38 miles an hour to just 12. One senior Army official says only 2 such defects have been found so far. U.S. military officials reportedly are predicting that an Allied ground offensive could begin in as few as 10 days. The Los Angeles Times quotes a high-placed Pentagon official as saying that by then Iraqi troops should be softened up. And the chairman of the House Armed Services Committee, Democrat Les Aspin, said today the odds of the war ending without a ground battle are pretty small. New York's Mayor David Dinkins is leading a 3-day solidarity mission to Israel. The mayor planned the trip to demonstrate goodwill toward the people of Israel and to show support for Gulf troops. Dinkins has meetings planned with Israel's president and foreign minister. In the U.S., President Bush is due to return to the White House from Camp David momentarily. We'll bring it to you. The president has declared today a national day of prayer, and he's asking Americans to pray for the safety of troops in the Gulf and their families. Tomorrow, Mr. Bush is due to submit a $1.4 trillion budget to the Congress. Those are the top stories. I'm David French in Washington. We'll have continuing coverage of the war in the Gulf throughout the evening, and in a moment we'll go to President Bush's return at the White House. But for now, back to CNN's World Report.
Welcome back to CNN World Report, where we bring you the news from the perspective of the world's broadcasters, uncensored and without editorial comment. Foreign ministers of the 11 Latin American countries that make up the Group of Rio met in Caracas, Venezuela Monday to devise a united response to the Gulf crisis. Energy supplies and the economic impact of the war dominated the agenda. Among the group was the minister from Bolivia, who had pledged to pursue a peace initiative. Back home, Bolivian workers and left-wing party leaders were calling for an end to the war, and one agricultural union had a very unusual response to the crisis. Canal 2 TSB tells us about it.
While the war in the Middle East is taking place, here in Bolivia it's easy to find some reactions against it. President Jaime Paz Zamora hasn't made any official comment about it yet, but the workers have. In their opinion, this is an Arab conflict, and the United States has nothing to do in it.
The eruption of the war in the Persian Gulf has provoked a wide variety of reactions in Bolivia. One of the most important has been the rejection caused among the coca growers. This group have expressed their rejection to the American presence in the Persian Gulf and announced that as a measure of protest, they will increase the production of coca, raw material for the elaboration of cocaine. It has to happen in this case of war. We must increase our production of coca to save our economy. We are definitely going to increase our production of coca leaf. Bolivia is the second largest producer of coca in the world, only surpassed by Peru. And even if there are plans of substitution and eradication of the coca leaf, not much has been achieved on this so far. The largest and most powerful worker union movement in Bolivia, Central Obrera Boliviana, is also opposed to the offensive taken by the multinational forces in the Gulf.
This is David French, CNN Washington. President and Mrs. Bush have just arrived at the White House on the south lawn of the White House in Marine One, the presidential helicopter, after a weekend at Camp David. The president declared this day a day of prayer, and he attended services at a small chapel there in the Maryland mountains at Camp David. He urged Americans to pray for the troops in the Gulf and for their families, wherever they may be, to give them strength. It isn't known if the president will come to the microphones to say anything. The reporters always try to urge him to say whatever might be on his mind or to ask him a specific question about how the war is going or whatever. America has just lost its first B-52 in the Indian Ocean. Let's listen. President Bush was asked how the war is going, and he said everything is on schedule. Everything is on schedule. There is more rising pressure to begin the ground war. However, it is expected that U.S. forces will hold off on any go decision for at least 10 or more days. That, of course, is all up in the air, but the president indicating that he has a lot more patience. Tomorrow he submits a budget to the Congress, a $1.4 trillion budget. He's back and hard at work again tonight on that at the White House. David French, CNN Washington, as we return you now to the World Report.
Due to regional problems that any country can take by force and annex territory of other nations. So by supporting very strongly the resolution of the United Nations, we are being very consistent with our traditional foreign policy.
Across the country, the Honduran people are very concerned about the Persian Gulf War, worrying about the fate of the coalition's forces, especially the sacrifice of the North Americans' youth. Honduras had always had good relations with the United States of America. The government offered to send troops to the Persian Gulf, first as a peacekeeping force, and secondly as a light battalion.
However, it is not just a simple aspect of being willing to go, but the logistics are very complicated. And due to the fact that there was not an unified command, it was very complex for Honduras to send a small contingent, a small battalion, to support and act within the framework of what was developing in the Persian Gulf.
Due to the oil crisis, the government implemented a 3-week plan to ration fuel. The Honduran armed forces have taken the necessary precautions in the event of terrorism in all refineries.
Because of the size of our economy, the effect between a developed and rich country and an underdeveloped and poor country like Honduras is 2 to 1. So every time that the price of fuel moves up, we have an increase of our rate of inflation that is out of control. Due to those circumstances, just in the months of August and October, the rate of inflation, when we liberalized the prices of fuel, increased in each of those months 4%. Secondly, foreign exchange. At this moment, 76% of the foreign exchange received by the Honduran government is utilized to pay for fuel. that, combined with the world recession and the effects that would occur after the war, would damage substantially our now weak and feeble economy. It is a very dramatic impact.
For CNN World Report, Nani de Flores here in Tegucigalpa, Honduras.
Coming up on CNN World Report, leaders gather in Iran to discuss the war. And later, a new assault on South Africa's apartheid system.
The Parliament adopts the government's proposals. The South African statute book will be...
From CNN International, I'm Jane McCauley. We take a break to bring you non-war related news from around the world. South Africa's peace hopes and the credibility of the African National Congress hinge on a trial beginning Monday. Winnie Mandela is scheduled to go on trial in Johannesburg along with several of her ex-bodyguards. The wife of ANC leader Nelson Mandela faces kidnapping and assault charges. State prosecutors say 4 youths were taken to Mrs. Mandela's home and beaten in December of 1988. The youngest of them, 14-year-old Stampe Sepe, was killed. The head of the disbanded bodyguards is already appealing a death sentence in the case. However, Monday's trial may be postponed because 4 of Mrs. Mandela's 7 co-defendants skipped bail in December. Observers believe the trial involves more than the future of the flamboyant Minnie Mandela. It also poses a threat to the credibility of her husband, and it could derail talks on ending white rule. Air pollution is forcing an industrial slowdown in Mexico. The government has ordered a 30% reduction in industrial activity in central Mexico to combat dangerously high concentrations of air pollution. The step taken is the first one laid down by the government's environmental contingency plan to decrease intolerable pollution levels. Argentinians are facing sharp increases in custom duties, fuel taxes, prices of electricity, gas, and other public services. It's all part of a government plan to reduce Argentina's budget deficit. At the same time, an emergency grant will be given to low-wage workers to offset the effects of major price rises last week. That's a quick look at news events from around the world. Stay tuned to CNN International for continuous updates on the situation in the Persian Gulf.
The non-aligned movement, composed of 102 mostly developing countries, is developing a formula of its own to end the war. The group, which includes both Iraq and Kuwait, is planning to hold a limited meeting on February 7th to discuss how to end the fighting. One of the members of the non-aligned movement, Sri Lanka, strongly supports the move because, as SLRC reports, the nation is feeling the negative impact of the war.
As the Gulf War rages on, President Premadasa of Sri Lanka has made an appeal for the restoration of peace. In an urgent message to the chairman of the non-aligned movement, Yugoslavian President Borisov Jovic, the Sri Lankan president had urged that a meeting of the ministerial committee of the movement be summoned immediately. Expressing distress at the escalation of the conflict, President Premadasa has also directed the Minister of Foreign Affairs to convene a meeting with the diplomats of the non-aligned countries represented in Sri Lanka as an initial move in the endeavor. He says the non-aligned movement is in a position to negotiate with all sides of the conflict and has a moral obligation to move in this matter. The proposal has been well received by the president of the non-aligned movement. The Secretary General of the United Nations had requested the non-aligned movement to intensify the efforts to negotiate for an end to the Gulf War. The tremors of the war are being felt the world over. Sri Lanka, as a developing country facing its own problems at home, is feeling the strain of the war in the Gulf. An estimated 90,000 Sri Lankan employees were in Kuwait at the time of the invasion in August. With some countries extending their helping hand, a large number of them were evacuated. The chairman of the Sri Lankan Foreign Employment Bureau says disruption of employment in West Asia will mean a loss of 100 million rupees a month. Owing to the reluctance of workers and non-availability of flights to this region, a drastic drop is recorded in the numbers employed in this region. A price hike of jet fuel has been made here, recorded as the highest since the Gulf crisis aggravated in August. Air traffic is disrupted as war escalates. The 51% upswing of the export earnings and 40% of the import earnings shown last year will be adversely affected if the war continues. The immediate effects are on the export of fruit and vegetables, which was a fast-growing trade with West Asia as well. One exporter claims he suffered an 85% decline. Recovering from the damages resulting from terrorist activities in the south and still in the grips of terrorism in the north and the east, the country can ill afford the bleak prospects indicated. This report from SLRC Sri Lanka for the CNN World Report.
On Saturday, a senior Iranian cleric warned U.S. President Bush of dire consequences in the Gulf War, accusing the coalition of conducting massacres on civilians. The cleric, in a message to Mr. Bush, said both the U.S. president and his Iraqi counterpart were responsible for the war. At the same time, the Iranian president was saying that the key to ending the Gulf War was Iraq's withdrawal from Kuwait. The Iranian leadership has been actively pursuing diplomatic initiatives since the onset of hostilities. Iranian television has more on this.
As of January 20th, Tehran has hosted many foreign politicians and celebrities who have come to Iran to help find a political settlement to the Persian Gulf crisis and end the Allied forces' attacks on civilian and economic areas in Iraq, and to put an end to Iraq's occupation of Kuwait. Iran, that has announced neutrality in the Persian Gulf conflict, is conducting intensive diplomatic efforts to terminate the hostility within the framework of the Non-Aligned Movement and the Islamic Conference Organization, of which Tehran is a member. Pak Prime Minister Mr. Nawaz Sharif conducting a peace-seeking mission to some regional countries, including Iran, Turkey, Syria, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and Jordan, came to Tehran to inform the Iranian officials of the purposes of his tour.
My talks in Tehran have been valuable and encouraging, with a complete convergence of views with regard to seeking an end to the conflict.
Syrian Vice President Mr. Abdul Halim Khaddam also traveled to Iran to review the latest developments in the region with the Iranian authorities, including President Rafsanjani and Vice President Habibi. The two sides condemned the Iraqi aggression on Kuwait and the presence of foreign forces in the Persian Gulf, and rejected any change in the region's geopolitical map. Indian Foreign Minister Mr. V.C. Shakola was the third foreign official to visit Iran. He came to Iran after a visit to Yugoslavia, during which he held dialogues with his Yugoslav counterpart, who currently holds the rotating presidency of the NAM. Iran has not changed its righteous stance regarding the Persian Gulf crisis. Tehran has condemned the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait and brushed aside any alternation in the regional geopolitics. It achieved peace with Iraq in accordance with the terms of UN Resolution 598 and apart from the Persian Gulf crisis.
We had a very useful and wide-ranging discussion with the leaders of Islamic Republic of Iran about the Persian Gulf crisis. The details of the initiative will be worked out in the proposed meeting of 5 non-aligned countries' foreign ministers, which will take place in first week of February in Belgrade.
I'm Parisa Ushmandian reporting for the CNN from Tehran, Iran.
Despite almost daily pro-Iraq demonstrations in Pakistan, the government has refused to recall its troops in the Gulf. Leaders of opposition political parties met on Saturday, demanding withdrawal of the 10,000 Pakistani troops deployed there. They also called for a nationwide strike next week to press for peace. Pakistan TV reports on the Prime Minister's recent diplomatic efforts.
The peace mission took Pakistan's Prime Minister along with a 40-member delegation to Iran, Turkey, Syria, Jordan, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia, with a formula for these countries to take a joint stand to stress on the Allied forces to stop war and to compel Iraq to leave Kuwait. In Iran, Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif held detailed talks with President Ali Akbar Hashmi Rafsanjani. Iran fully endorsed Pakistan's peace initiative, and both countries agreed that an emergency session of the Organization of Islamic Conference be convened to play a pivotal role to end the Gulf conflict. Both the leaders agreed that Iraq should totally and completely withdraw from Kuwait and respect the United Nations resolution. On the next leg of his mission to Turkey, Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif held talks with the Turkish Prime Minister Yildirim Akbulut and President Turgut Özal. While the Turkish leaders also agreed that the Organization of Islamic Conference should play its role to bring an end to the hostilities in the Gulf, both Pakistan and Turkey called upon Iraqi President Saddam Hussein to give up his unprincipled and untrue stand on Kuwait and immediately withdraw his forces. In pursuit of his efforts to bring an end to the Gulf War, Mohammad Nawaz Sharif flew into Damascus, where he held formal talks with the Syrian Prime Minister Mahmoud al-Zubi and detailed meeting with the President Hafiz al-Assad. Both sides stressed the importance of implementing the Arab Summit and Security Council resolutions calling for Iraqi pullout of Kuwait in order to avert the destructive consequences in the Gulf. Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif's next destination of his peace mission was Jordan. Mr. Nawaz Sharif briefed the Jordanian monarch about the outcome of his talks with Iran, Turkey, and Syria. Both leaders discussed the obtaining Gulf situation and efforts for bringing about peace in the region. King Hussein stressed that peace was imperative at this stage, even if temporary, so that renewed efforts were brought on all sides. Talks between President Hosni Mubarak of Egypt and Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif were termed as very significant. While extending full cooperation to Pakistan to end the war, President Mubarak outlined the efforts he had made to avoid an armed conflict in the region. Mr. Nawaz Sharif was optimistic that a formula would emerge which would bring the Muslim countries closer to a solution.
Where there's a will, there is a way, and we are now trying to explore the possibilities of finding a solution to this problem.
On the last leg of his six-nation peace mission, Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif flew to Saudi Arabia to meet King Fahd. The meeting between King Fahd and Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif lasted for more than 2 hours. King Fahd was apprised about the purpose of Pakistan's peace mission and the outcome of the talks with the Muslim leaders. Mr. Nawaz Sharif again expressed his desire for convening of the OIC, which he stressed was capable of dealing with the Gulf crisis most effectively.
Stay with CNN World Report. When we return, women join Quebec's infantry. And later, a look at some money problems in the Soviet Union.
New team on the beat. Journalists from every major news organization. One broke the story on the Iran-Contra scandal. Another is best known for his unprecedented political coverage for NBC News. Their exposés have won critical acclaim and widespread recognition. From the horrors of medical malpractice to shaking up the inner sanctum of televangelism, they tell it like it is. CNN's special assignment, the most experienced investigative unit ever assembled. Watch for their reports on CNN International.
In the Gulf this week, the disappearance of a United States servicewoman is seen as a chilling reminder that modern warfare does not discriminate. Although U.S. law forbids women to engage in combat, the missing soldier was part of a transport unit near the Iraq-Saudi border. And as even more women join the Allied forces, seasoned veterans argue that anyone can end up missing or even killed in action. Canada's Pathonic Television reports on 2 young women who are ready to take that risk.
Isabelle Ferland and Marie-Josée Chenard have two strong character traits in common, a love of challenge and a taste for action. And they won't be getting much of a chance to relax in the career that awaits them. Being infantry women will put them into direct contact with the enemy. Their mission will be to destroy their foe. They'll be taking part in aerial, mobile, and environmental missions. They may work in Arctic, jungle, or desert conditions.
If men can do it, why not women? These days, women are involved in everything. Why not the Army?
On February 11th, the two recruits will head out to Saint-Jean-de-Belleville, where they'll undergo 10 weeks of basic training. They'll then return to Valcartier for another 16 weeks. That's where they'll be schooled in the use of firearms, explosives, and other equipment. Then there's training in hand-to-hand combat for the advance towards the enemy. Basically, everything they'll need to know for combat. After that, if need be, they'll go to war.
When you enlist, you have to think you don't just enlist to stay at home and do nothing. If there's war, it's our job to go. If they call me, I'll go.
They're the first two infantry women in the Royal 22nd Regiment. But they haven't been getting special treatment because of it.
It's been proven that women can do any job, even that of the infantry, which is very rigorous, very tough. In the U.S., in Israel, it's been proven that women can be in combat. Why not Quebec women?
This report by Pathonic International Canada for the CNN World Report.